Right. Welcome, everyone. I see a lot of people joining us already. So glad to have you here today. We will get started shortly. So as soon as we'll get started in a few minutes, but we'd love to hear from you where you are coming in from. Please type that in the chat box. We'd love to know where everyone's located today. We will start shortly. Right, lots of people coming in, still joining us for this exciting topic today as we kick off Leadership Week. This is so exciting. People are coming in from all over the place here. Right. Again, welcome everyone. We are excited to have you for Leadership Week this week. My name is Amy Gamblin. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Services. And I'm also joined by Caroline Francis, who is the Director of Alumni Career Services with the Alumni Association. So please let us know where you're coming from. We'd love to hear where everyone's located in the chat box here. Please type that in. We want to welcome you again for our first webinar in our Leadership Week. Very exciting presentation today on how AI is impacting your industry. So looking forward to that topic. And we have a great panelist as well. So looking forward to what they want to share in their particular industries. Just a reminder, again, this is a kickoff to our Leadership Week this week. Tomorrow we will have a wonderful talk about appreciation in the workplace. And that will be presented by Jason Chadwell, who's the Senior Organizational Development Specialist at UK Healthcare Enterprise Learning. And on Wednesday, we will have Carla Kurtzinger, communications consultant with Point Taken Consulting, where she will present on what's your goal. Crafting an elevator pitch can make it happen. Then as a reminder, we also have a networking event on Wednesday night at Pasta Garage from 5:30 to 7 p.m. We hope you can join us there. And then to wrap up Leadership Week Thursday, I will actually be presenting on Motivate to Elevate Your Leadership, Their Brilliance. So registration for all of these events can be found in the chat box. So looking forward for an exciting week of Leadership Week this week, and looking forward to having you join us there. So again, today's discussion will be on how AI is impacting your industry. And we have a wonderful panelist of people who want to discuss, how is it impacting their industry? And if you have questions, again, we'll be moderating the chat box. Type those questions in there. We hope to leave a few minutes after the panel discussion for some Q&A. So I do want to introduce the moderator today. We are so grateful Antoine Huffman is able to join us. Antoine has served in several leadership positions within the University of Kentucky Alumni Association, most recently as past president of the association. He is a regional sales director for a medical device company based in Union City, California. And Antoine received his bachelor's degree in telecommunications in 2005. And while at Kentucky, he was a 3-year starter for the UK Wildcats football team, becoming a UK NCAA record holder. Antoine has positively transformed many young lives with his active involvement in the community, Habitat for Humanity, Boys and Girls Club, the Salvation Army, and motivational speaking at local churches, schools. And from 2002 to 2005, he was nationally recognized for his community service, academics, and athletic achievements. In addition, he was a finalist for the Warfel Trophy, ARA Sportsmanship Award, 2-time ESPN, the Magazine Academic All-America, 4-time NCAA Academic All-American, 4-time SEC Academic Honor Roll, and a member of the Good Works team. So we're very appreciative Antoine, who will be moderating our panel discussion. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I am honored to moderate this lovely, distinguished panel that we have here. They're experts in their own field, and I want to go ahead and introduce our lovely, distinguished panel. I will start off by introducing Dr. Daniel Wambon, who is an assistant professor of anesthesiology at the University of Kentucky, Department of Anesthesiology, perioperative, critical care, and pain medicine. Dr. Wambon earned a DS from MIT and an MD from the University of Pennsylvania, and was a resident in anesthesiology at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Since 2022, he has served as Director of Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence for Anesthesiology. Welcome, Dr. Wambon. Dr. Trey Canaster is a director of the UK Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching, which collaborates with faculty, staff, students, and support of the university teaching mission. In addition to offering an array of services and programming for the educational and instructional development, CELT works with the university leadership on some of the most pressing issues for higher education, including the rise of generative AI. Trey co-chairs the UK Advanced team, which is charged with providing guidance and recommendations to the university community based on its emerging evidence and experience with generative AI and instructional research, clinical care, and administrative settings. He organized the AI and education sessions for the 2023 Commonwealth Computational Summit and has given talks on generative AI in both education and the workforce at local, state, and national meetings. Trey holds a PhD in English from The Ohio State University, with a specialized in writing studies and digital humanities. He teaches courses in technical and professional writing, digital scholarly methods in the humanities, and prepare future faculty. He is currently teaching a course focusing on exclusive on generative AI as part of the graduate certificate in college teaching and learning. Welcome, Dr. Canaster. And we have Sarah Sanders, who is the co-founder and COO of Native AI. She began in tech as an early employee at 2 startups that went on to become publicly traded companies. You may know them as Rubicon and Toast Incorporated. Sarah serves as vice chair for the Von Hallman Center for Entrepreneurship and the University of Kentucky Gatton College of Business, as well as a board member at Pub Group Investment, a private equity-backed restaurant group. She earned her undergraduate degree in business management from the University of Kentucky and an MBA in international business from Xavier University. Welcome, Sarah. So that is our star-studded panel today. I know you guys want to hear more from them and not from me, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I will start with you, Dr. Wambon, and then we'll go with Dr. Canaster and then Sarah for this question here in that order. Dr. Wambon, can you share with us how is artificial intelligence impacting your Pacific industry today?
Well, it's an interesting question because there's sort of 2 main facets of work that we do. One is in the operating room, actually taking care of patients in the ICU and that sort of thing. And the other is before and after, when we deal with the doctor-patient relationship, when we're talking to people, getting them ready for things like surgery and that sort of thing. So from the OR perspective, most of our work, and that's where I spend most of my time, although the field of anesthesiology incorporates critical care as well. Personally, I spend most of my time in the operating room. But in both the OR and in the ICU, we rely on machine learning for lots of things to sort of help out. Computers watch vital signs and can give us early warnings to things such as incipient sepsis or other concerns. But it doesn't really move up to the level of artificial intelligence, which relies on machine learning, but tries to wrap a human-type interaction around it. For that, we'd have to look to the patient and really the preoperative setting, which I think will see a lot more impact from artificial intelligence in the near future. When ChatGPT burst onto the scene about a year ago, I think it was roughly a year ago, we were very excited about this. This was something totally different, and we thought, how can we leverage this sort of very powerful engine in our doctor-patient relationship? And so we did within our department a little bit of an experiment where we created some patient profiles. They were made up, but they were patient profiles. And we put a senior attending anesthesiologist in the position of interviewing this patient to make sure they're ready for anesthesia and surgery. And we did the same thing with ChatGPT, literally gave it the same preamble about the patient and the surgery and what questions should you ask in that. It was amazing how this generative AI conglomeration was able to come up with very cogent questions. It noticed some abnormalities, and we think that I don't think it will replace doctors and the doctor-patient relationship anytime soon, luckily, but as an adjunct to help patients prepare for surgery, even something as relatively non-specifically trained as ChatGPT, it can do intake for us and sort of focus on areas that may be very important for us to ask more questions about in the preoperative period. That would free up our clinicians to do other things rather than sort of a standard history and physical and routine questions we ask the same way every day. It certainly serves as a novel new perspective for any given patient to help you find things that perhaps you weren't thinking of. Computers have the ability of not forgetting certain things that you take for granted, and we think that that's where this is going to have its earliest impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Wamball. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Dr. Knatzer, what do you think, sir? How's it affecting your area?
Great, thanks. And my area that I'll speak to is just sort of the educational space at large in higher education. But I think a lot of these comments will sort of translate across the board to any of these settings. There's a lot of different levels that we're seeing AI, and particularly generative AI, kind of impacting the educational sector. And it's been roughly a year and a half that we've had public access to some of these tools that at first glance seem to work feats of magic, really, when, as Dr. Wambold was narrating, that, almost sort of human level reasoning that all of a sudden we were seeing from machines and chatbots that previously, we might get frustrated on at customer service websites and so on. So this was a kind of new game changer for all of us. And this is at different levels in education. They're sort of at the very granular level. This is really asking us to think about what we do in classroom settings, in lab settings, and clinical spaces. So at that granular level of how we teach classes, how we learn, across the board in education, teachers, instructors, faculty are thinking really hard about what the productive applications of generative AI are in their educational settings, how they can enhance student learning, and what are the things that we need to make sure we avoid as well in terms of the pitfalls and dangers of the technology. And the same thing in labs, for example, for our research enterprises. We're thinking about how these things can augment our work and adjunct our work and take things and automate them that we don't really mind automating. And that's, of course, a whole conversation unto itself. At sort of a larger level, though, the impact on education is kind of changing how we engage with our professions and our areas of specialization. There's some existential questions, and I'm in writing studies, and this is a technology that can seemingly automate writing to a certain degree. And so this leads to some big questions around what it is that we're here to teach, what kind of skills are important for students to learn and master as they go out into the workforce and become leaders. These are long conversations. As much as this is a fast and disruptive technology, these are long and careful conversations that we're having in education. But what we're not missing out on is that there is this potential to accelerate how we can best support students, how we can teach students, prepare them for their future careers, how we can accelerate learning. and clinical care, as well as how we can do our business as an institution. There's a lot of data that we have that generative AI can be kind of key to exploring. There's a lot of ways that we can make sense of the vast amounts of data that we produce as an institution with generative AI technologies. And this is one of the speculative areas, that we're still kind of figuring out as we can maybe operationalize and implement some generative AI slowly into our operations. But we're just thinking about the world that we're sending students into and that we're researching, as well as how it's going to be different with this technology as it maybe never settles down per se, but sort of becomes more of a commonplace in all of our professional settings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Canasser. I appreciate that. And Sarah, can you share a little bit with us about how it's impacting your particular industry?
Sure. And I'm going to answer this question a little differently because I am in the business of AI tools specifically, but we work with a segment we'll call the CPG industry, which is consumer brands. So that anything that you can physically eat or drink, it could be a service provider even, that could be a software company, that could be any type of service provider that you think we work with specifically. So anything consumer facing that's tangible or service forward. And what we do for them is make something, what we call qualitative data, so written word, far more efficient. Let's use an example. I always pull out something that's sitting on my desk or in front of me. So we have Burt's Bees chapstick that happens to be sitting right here. That's a consumer brand, a brand that most of us are probably familiar with. Say, for example, this brand is looking to roll out a new flavor or something that's more environmentally friendly in terms of their packaging. Maybe they've done it, maybe they're looking to do it because their competitors have done it and they're seeing themselves lose market share, or people are less interested in buying their product for whatever reason it may be. How do we collect qualitative data if we're a brand? Well, a lot of times people leave reviews on places like Target, Whole Foods, Walmart. Maybe they buy directly from my website and they leave reviews there. Maybe people complain to our service email that we leave on our website. Or maybe people talk about our brand on places like Reddit or social media. So how do we, as brand managers at a company like Burt's Bees, manage brand health? See what people like, what they don't, how is sentiment around our particular product or our brand as a whole increasing or decreasing over time? Because certainly there's always something going on in rapidly changing consumer brands industries. Something's always trending, something's always changing. And what's guaranteed to always be changing is consumer preferences. It's hard to track what those are at any point in time. So what we do is use a form of AI called natural language processing. How you manage that really well in today's society for, in most cases, more cost-efficient ways than having analysts manage this data as frequently as they have time, nearly in real time in a lot of ways. If you build the right architecture, you can use today's large language models, or what we call LLMs, to draw insights from your data pool in fractions of a second. What we focus on particularly, and while ChatGPT is an incredible tool, I think it's one of the most profound pieces of technology that people are familiar with, certainly in the last year and a half, but probably arguably in the last decade or more, is that it's a generalist tool. It can have information from everywhere, but you don't necessarily know where it's drawing from or the exact recency of the data. So it can't give you enough context to make a business decision a lot of times. Or if you owned, data that you wouldn't want your competitors seeing, company like Burt's Bees, struggling to think of any other chapstick brands on the market, but there's plenty that we know of. We wouldn't want a big data company to be fed our proprietary data that we own, because we might not know where it's going to go. Is it going to help my competition? Does that give anybody that kind of data and impact the answers a generalist tool like ChatGPT could be giving? So what we do in particular is provide access to public data, organize it. Again, those Target reviews, Walmart reviews, anyone can find. Do that cleanly for your brand, for your competitors, but you can also load your own proprietary data in that set. So when it comes to qualitative data, you've got one pool of data, and it's a lot cleaner than the old spreadsheet or checking it manually, page by page, product by product. It's incredibly inefficient. That's the way of doing brand management and insights management, a way of the past. And Dr. Canaster used a term that we like to use in-house a lot. There is an existential crisis for brands and for market research companies that work with these brands. Very, very quickly, there's more efficient ways or more efficient tools to implement into the process. And our way of doing business is utilizing natural language processing and crafting it to a specific outcome in today's world for consumer brands and market research firms.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I really appreciate it. It seems that AI has been incredibly great to us as far as making us efficient, effective in certain areas and you guys' own industry. But obviously it poses some great opportunities out there. So I want to kind of focus a little bit. Do you guys see in particular industries right now, is there any potential further opportunities that AI can generate for us down the road in your particular industries? And Dr. Canaster, I'd like to start with you with this question.
Sure, that's great. And sort of to what Sarah was just saying about a rapidly changing industry, as well as consumer preferences changing very quickly, I think that both in education as well, one of the opportunities that we think we want to focus on is how generative AI in particular, the AI that can make things in addition to sort of analyze things, whether it's making language or images, is the ability to be much more responsive and adaptive very quickly with fewer resources. I think that's one of the opportunities that we're looking at, and we're asking questions about how can we do it in ways that cleave to the spirit of our mission and accomplish our educational purpose in ways that are still human-centered, that are still in line with the goals that we're setting, but that also are harnessing kind of the great language processing power and pattern seeking power of these different tools. And just one kind of example that lots of people like to talk about is personalized learning. And that can mean a lot of different things. In education, it can mean sort of individualized tutoring through a generative AI. It can mean that an instructor or a faculty member is augmenting their work with generative AI to adapt their curriculum to different situations. Let's say a traditional student population versus a short-term sort of working with employees of a different company, adult learners, and so on. So you can use that to adapt to different situations, as well as kind of making sense of a lot of the communications and linguistic data that a university or a school system generates that does traditionally take a lot of resources and time to try to understand very well. And this can be an important tool to get at some insights pretty quickly and make some adaptive decisions based on changing market preferences, et cetera. And so this is also something that educational institutions are thinking about is, we look to an uncertain future for higher education. We think about future students. We think about the changing landscape of higher education, competition for training and upskilling. And this can be a way of adapting and being responsive in that way. So all the way from the individual classroom implementation to kind of these large scale operational deployments. But I also think that there's an opportunity for, and if this is done in a way to where there's an equity of access in educational systems and institutions, that this can be a real democratizing, leveling kind of technology. And of course, carefully caveat there that it should be sort of freely accessible by everyone in an institution or a school system. But this can be a way to supercharge anyone's efforts, whether your job is to work with paperwork in an office, or if you're a student who's in a classroom trying to learn math better, or you're an overworked teacher who's trying to, do the best that you can for each student in your class. This can be a way of offloading a lot of kind of labor-intensive, time-intensive work without giving up the human agency and accountability or oversight. But we can sort of supercharge, even give people superpowers if we think about if everyone had access to, almost the sum totality of linguistic data across the internet and other pieces of sources of evidence, then they could do their jobs a lot more quickly and be more successful.
Awesome. Anything that can make me give me a superpower and supercharge me, I am on board for that. So
Well,
I
it's
really
like every
appreciate that.
superpower, there's always sort of
That fine line.
the sword's edge, right? Because
Yeah,
that's the story from all the comic books and all the superhero stories is every superpower is, with great power comes great responsibility, as in Spider-Man, and as our provost sometimes likes to quote in his speeches. And so that's also the key here, is to make sure we use it responsibly.
absolutely. I'm sure there's a fine line. And I'm gonna come back to that because I have a question about some of those challenges that may come up. But Dr. Wambo, I want to kind of go to you now and see, are there opportunities in the future of how you can see AI can improve things a little bit better than what it is today in medicine?
Yeah, I think so. We're just getting started with the things that it can do. Obviously, we want to be cautious because the stakes are high. But I think the initial impact will be allowing patients to have an early interaction with some of these large language model chatbots, to put in some medical history of their own and sort of figure out who needs to come into clinic, who needs to make the trip in and take a day off of work to see us ahead of time to make sure they're ready for surgery. So a lot of patients come in because they meet a couple of checkpoints and the internist says, you really have to go in and see the anesthesiologist, or the surgeon says, really not sure, go in and see. But, some of these models are quite good at determining whether there's something to be concerned about. Now, that's just the patient side of things. We also teach. And of course, teaching, as we just heard from Dr. Canaster, is an important way for AI to help as well. So I think teaching our residents will be a very important thing, going forward with some of the ways AI can help them understand the things that they need to do to be good doctors. Now, of course, since my unique perspective isn't in the teaching side, Dr. Canaster's got a lot more experience with that than I have. I'll skip over most of that, but I think that's going to be a very important part of what we do from a medical education standpoint as well. But like I said, as far as the patients go, that's sort of I think the part that I bring to this panel here. And I think we'll probably start using AI about the same time that patients are going to start to realize that they can sit at home and learn something about what's coming. These generic chatbots know, and I use know in quotation marks, they don't know things, obviously the word association engines for the most part, but they know things about what patients will experience with anesthesia and surgery. And a lot of the questions that patients have, they may find helpful information, some answers to, or at least allow them to focus on particular questions. So when they see their physician or other provider, they can sort of ask more direct and meaningful things, get the answers that they need to help them make their own plans for medical health care.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to come back to you as well when I get to my next question. I think there's some areas of challenges. I'm in the medical field as well when it comes to, especially when you talk about that the intake questions that AI can help us with, but then you have HIPAA concerns, and as AI learns, how does the industry get around that? So I'm coming back to that here in a little bit. Sarah, can you share with us a little bit, in your industry, of what you can see how AI can improve things for us in the future that may not be happening right now?
Sorry, the question is, how can it improve things that might not be happening right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the example I gave before, consumer preferences are always changing, and I will extrapolate this a little bit to include kind of the medical field as well, because we haven't worked in it directly, but I see a lot of parallels as to how can we anticipate better,
Okay.
or how can we get ahead of certain areas that we might not have the resources to keep an eye on all day, every day, right? There's only so many doctors, there's only so many product managers, but how can we let technology do some of the work for us in the interim? We have recently at Native AI launched a tool. We just launched our second version of it. And what it is called is our digital twins tool. So you can have this database, right, that you build yourself, you custom build. Here's my category that I care about from a product perspective. And here are the individual contributors or consumers. I might be a market research company that has dense information. I have private information about people, their age, where they live, sexual orientation, so on and so forth, ethnicity, all those things that to most people prefer to be kept private, or companies are required to keep private. And I imagine, you know, that kind of parallels a little bit to HIPAA laws and privacy as well. But for those that do have permission to manage it, you say, what can we do to do more with information we already have? How can we be more efficient with information we already have, and marry that with a lot of known use cases or high likelihood use cases that have happened, right? So maybe we are a market research company and we're sitting on this massive, what we call data lake in a lot of cases. Data lake, how can we do as much as possible with this data lake that we have? There's a couple things you can do. You can organize it, you aggregate it, and you organize it, right? That's kind of the first step. Now, what can we do on top of it? And that's what our digital twins tool is. We say, all right, we know quite a bit about a lot of people, or maybe I only have one paragraph worth of information from someone that left a review on Walmart about this type of product. Or the market research company might have an hour-long interview process about that particular product, what they don't like, what they do like about that brand and its competitors. No matter how much or how little, there are things you can take away, whether you have private information about that person, or in a lot of cases, you might have no information about that particular person, but you have behavioral characteristics or responses. Or someone might have said in their review about a new toy that's on the market, I purchased this for my grandson's birthday. He loves it. This brand is great, and I would definitely look to buy another one like it. They didn't tell me who they were, but they kind of told me who they were, because this is likely a grandparent. And so there are contextual clues. You won't find them in every single place. But how can we take away clues and pieces of information to collect more data from data that's already there and create a digital twin? What does that exactly mean? We can say we know this information about this particular person. And if I have someone, again, back to the chapstick example, I can ask them about, you know, cosmetic products. I think that would be fairly safe. Or more, you know, different types of questions about a product like this, but I wouldn't want to go ask them about a sweatshirt, more than likely, right? That's kind of extrapolating a little bit, and that's one thing you want to think about in the risk department when you're trying to make better sense of information, but not go too far. So that's one thing that I see in our space is not only better organizing information, but trying to take it to the next step and say, here's what we know. Here's what we think there's a high likelihood of this person probably responding using a lot of today's AI tools in the marketplace. There are a lot of algorithms that exist that manage Q&A really well, or question and answer very well. So I imagine, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I am excited to hear on the medical side of things, how that could potentially be a safe harbor while, you know, protecting a lot of HIPAA information, marrying that with information that is known within the medical world. Are there applications you could probably see out there?
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I'm very interested in that as well. I really appreciate it. But I want to stay with you a little bit. I think you was hinting at a little bit, you know,
Sure.
Some of the most significant challenges that we may see, or some barriers that may come about with AI in the industry. So can you share a little bit in a little bit more detail of what you think some of those significant challenges may be, or barriers?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest challenges is to making the most of AI. Is not every hospital, university, company has resources to evaluate AI tools or algorithms that might exist. That maybe there's no capital barrier to entry, but there's definitely a knowledge gap of, okay, you know, pardon my language, but what the hell do we do with these things? I've heard about the power of them, but how do we appropriately evaluate what's right for us or for our industry? And that's why I think you're starting to see a lot more movement from generalist tools that can be helpful to the average person in their day-to-day life, but maybe not necessarily in their career as much, or in their day-to-day job. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we're going, is carving niches, and that allows us to mitigate some of the risk too, is understanding there's not enough talent out there, but there are tools that are so specific, and maybe they're coming from companies we already work with, right? Other technology companies we use can offer a service. There's a level of trust. We're never going to build an internal team because there's not enough data scientists in the world right now at all to even try to meet the growing demand for AI. So how do we bridge that gap? And I think we're starting to see kind of like more niche builds to allow people to understand how to deploy and make good use of these technologies.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Dr. Wambaugh, I want to go to you with the same question here. I think we sort of have a little bit of inkling on some of the challenges AI may present in the medical field, and particularly if we use the scenario of, you know, these intake questions as AI learns more and more about individual patients, you know, will HIPAA become a concern? You know, that's kind of one of my burning questions, but I want to give you an opportunity to go in detail, see if there's any significant challenges you may see with AI, even outside of that as well.
Well, the HIPAA concerns, I think, would largely be taken care of by an opt-in model. In other words, there's nothing to stop the patient from talking to anyone about anything. It's their decision. So as long as you make it clear that it's not required, even, you know, the publicly available AI models probably won't run afoul of HIPAA. From what I understand, most of the current models don't actually learn any new information. Once their training is done, they're fixed. During the course of a conversation, the model can refer back to information that it's gleaned during that interaction. But when you restart, log back in, it hasn't retained any of your information. That's part of the building and training process, not the interactive process. So I think working around that shouldn't be a large problem. I don't see it as being, you know, fundamentally different than filling out an intake form and emailing it to your physician. We do that now. I think one of the bigger challenges we're going to face has to do with something a lot more subtle. Most of these large language models, which is, I think, primarily what we're all talking about now, are trained based on publicly available information, mostly written stuff in various places. Most of the things that are written are declarative. In other words, you have an idea, you write it down, and it's a declarative statement. So these machines have been trained with declarative statements. That makes their answers sound authoritative. However, there's really no evidence that the answer is authoritative. In fact, you know, people who know AI could easily tell you the answers aren't answers at all. They're word association things, which sound great. And it's amazing how often the computers will put together words in sentences that look like they make sense. Unfortunately, occasionally they do things like hallucinate, which, you know, it's really not hallucination. It's just a matter of the computer using the proximity of words to come up with sentences. But for things that are important, that can be a problem. So I think the biggest pitfall would be to overestimate the on-face value of generative AI. I think it's a tool like any other. And just like a noisy EKG could give you an erroneous reading, you can't take everything without at least some careful consideration as to the source and possible errors involved. Nevertheless, it's still very exciting. And I think that overall the benefits will far outweigh the risk. But it's very easy to be seduced by the definitive nature of some of these devices, and you have to remember they're not sure of anything. They're just very clever.
Absolutely, I really appreciate that, Dr. Wambaugh. You know, the very simplistic analogy I would use is, you know, when Google first came out years and years ago, and we would type something into Google and it would, you know, print out whatever result we had, and I think the perception was is if it was in Google, it was true. Right. But to your point, we have to go back and still do our research and make sure that the information that we're seeing and we're reading is validated. I kind of just had that in the back of my head, like as we move forward, because we always have to make sure we check but verify the information.
Yeah. I don't feel like I'm going to be replaced anytime soon. Maybe augmented, but probably not replaced.
Absolutely. I like it. So that leads us into a great segue with Dr. Knaster for you as well. In education, you know, Obviously, we know AI may pose some challenges, but one of the burning questions I have is, as it, you mentioned it helps us kind of be more responsive and adaptive in education. Do you feel that this type of technology will kind of, to a certain extent, make our student population a little bit lazy? Or, would it help us continue to generate our competitive, or lack of better words, continue to have our minds wander and still be able to generate new ideas? Or would it kind of guide us down this path of this tunnel vision?
That's a great question. And just wanted to echo from Daniel what you were saying. I consider myself rarely sure of myself, but perhaps very clever. So I'll identify with the generative AI in that part. But what a question, Antoine, around, and this is one of the big ones around using any kind of AI technologies in the educational enterprise. Does it ultimately assist in our intellectual growth, our development of skill sets, et cetera? Or are there some dangers here around, let's say, offloading too much of the tasks that are actually integral to our ability to learn and develop as human beings? And this is something we've been negotiating. Several of us have already alluded to precedents in the past of similarly disruptive technologies that have challenged our notion of where legitimate knowledge comes from, to what degree the exercise of learning is this self-initiated, self-sustained, kind of hermetically sealed operation. The rise of the internet is a great example to point to in the 90s. Even in sort of a microcosmic way, the rise of things like Wikipedia, et cetera, there are these moments where disruptive digital technologies emerge. And in education, we have to think through, to what degree is this really just bypassing, and what the phrase that I like to use, where the learning happens. And so right now, in terms of the research that's coming out, it's a little mixed in terms of the use of generative AI as to whether or not it enhances students' skills and competencies in the long term. And what I take from that, when I look at all of it, and I look at the methods, I look at the populations, I look at the nature of the research, is that it really does depend on how we implement the technologies in education. And that is, perhaps a little bit of a bland answer, but just as with any technology, if we implement it uncritically, maybe a little hastily, and in a way that is not guiding students to develop critical literacies and skill sets with how to use it, then we're probably going to go down the wrong road. But if we're thinking carefully around the ways that students are going to have to be able to use this in the workforce, and if we're thinking about how they can augment their work and become more successful, but still are engaging in activities themselves, then it can work pretty well from what we're seeing. So it's a kind of, it depends sort of answer. And, if it's desired later, we could get into sort of more granular around some examples of when it works or when it doesn't work.
Awesome. This has been great. I really appreciate you guys' responses, and I could talk about this for another 45 minutes to an hour. But I did want to give an opportunity for our guests here to ask some questions, and I'm going to pass it off to Amy here. I think there's a couple of questions, Amy, in the chat that a couple of our guests would like to ask.
I've been looking at moderating the chat box. I think some of you have already answered the questions in response. If you do have a question, please feel free to type it in there. Caroline, please let me know if I missed anything.
Not seeing any questions at this time. If our audience members do have a question, this is a great opportunity to drop it in the chat box, and we'll be able to answer a couple of questions here.
Well, I have another one while we're looking. Do we have one there?
There's
Not
one
yet?
that just came through.
Okay.
Dr. Wambaugh, I've read about using AI to control anesthetic levels more accurately. Any thoughts on this?
Oh, plenty. So this has been tried in various ways. It's very interesting. There is a device, I believe the trade name was SetAssist, that monitored different physiologic parameters and adjusted the dosing of anesthesia in a real-time basis. It can be done. That's not really artificial intelligence so much as a machine learning algorithm. So it's just related, but you know, strictly speaking, it's not AI. Having said that, it's interesting. It worked. It got FDA approved, and it was very unpopular. They were using it for colonoscopy sedation. And because of the limitations of the device, that it couldn't step in and manage an airway, put in a breathing tube, fix problems. The sedation level was kept relatively light. And as a result, the patients moved around a fair amount during the colonoscopy and were somewhat uncomfortable. So unfortunately, it didn't really make a large clinical impact. That doesn't mean that there isn't a place for the sort of machine learning algorithms that were used. I think it'll be a while before you replace clinicians with this sort of thing. But having said that, some of the anesthesia machines these days allow you to set a target value for one of the anesthesia agents, and the machine will use its internal algorithms to adjust the actual delivered dose to hit that target. I'm not sure we've seen that that's clinically advantageous. In other words, outcome data don't support that that's a better approach, but it's certainly a start. It doesn't mean we won't find someday that there's a way for that to be a better approach. We're looking, and that's the thing, is that we're going to continue to look for these opportunities and ways that, as the systems become capable of doing more and monitoring more parameters and interleaving the data from more sources, there's no reason to think we won't get devices that can, if not help out, but replace people. We'll have to see.
Thank you for that, Dr. Wambaugh. We understand if you need to jump off. We do have a couple other questions, but feel free to jump off, and we'll continue to answer some of these questions for the next couple of minutes. Alan asked, from an education perspective, how do you deal with the quality? And I just lost it. My chat's jumping all around here. How do you deal with the quality of information provided by AI, understanding that it draws from many sources? And Trey, that might be a good question for you to answer.
Great question. So the first thing to point out is something that we've talked a little bit about already, and that's level of access and equity when it comes to deploying these technologies in the educational space. So there's free versions of these generative AI tools, and there's versions that you can pay for individually, or that you can get, enterprise licenses, institutional subscriptions, etc. The free versions tend not to be as sophisticated as the ones that you pay for. And so that impacts the, I'll say both quality of information as well as quality of interaction with the generative AI tool. That's just one thing to note. But largely from an educational perspective, one of the things we're trying to do before we even get to this question about whether or not the information that students or instructors get from it is quality, is that we have to reframe our understanding of what this technology even is in the first place. And it's really weird. It's very different than a lot of other kind of technologies that we have seen burst onto the scene in the last few decades. It isn't necessarily just a repository of information, even though it was trained on vast amounts of information. It's not necessarily a kind of search and retrieval system like a Google search or something more specialized, even though it might feel that way a little bit because of the chatbot interface. So there's a lot of these kind of deceptive elements to it that might sort of, in a human-computer interaction sense, lead us to think that what we're doing is asking for information and it's coming from some sort of information source. But as Dr. Wambaugh was saying earlier, there's this notion of hallucination, and I'd like to kind of really expand that and even suggest that it's in the very mechanics and DNA of generative AI technologies, whether we're talking visual, music, video, text-based, or multimodal. It's in the DNA that it is always dreaming, always hallucinating, because it's guessing what's trying to approximate something that looks like a good response. We just think about it hallucinating when it gets things wrong, but really what it's doing, it's a somnambulist. It's always dreaming, always sleeping and hallucinating. And so as long as we understand that the guesswork is in part of the DNA, and we teach students that, and it's part of the critical AI literacies that we're advocating for, then they approach it with sort of a different sense of how it can be a tool for getting adjacent to information, how we can use perhaps more specialized tools like consensus.ai or Scite or some of the more research-oriented tools that are geared towards finding information, but still that we are critical with what our sort of feedback from the AI is, and that we always augment that process with other methods and means of verifying information, because ultimately we're responsible as the human. If we're using it to help us write an email and we click send, we're responsible for that email. If we're writing up a sort of a report based on some data that we generated, but then fed to an AI to tell us what to think about it, we're still responsible for the implications of what those findings are. And so we want to kind of have that nuance in how we approach it and always be critical of the output that we're getting. And specifically, if it has to do with the veracity of certain information that we're checking elsewhere and verifying.
Thank you for that, Trey. One more question. Will the increased use of AI in the medical field oblige insurance companies to decrease the amount they pay to cover medical services? What are the other financial implications that could arise from more AI integration in the medical industry?
Interesting question. I don't know of an insurance company that doesn't want to decrease the pay to medical professionals, so I'm sure they'll try to use that. Is it any different than the textbook I have on my shelf? I don't get paid less because somebody else did the work. Having said that, we'll have to see. I mean, if it turns out that patients can see less specifically trained folks for answers, perhaps, I don't know. The medical reimbursement complex is complicated, and we'll just have to see what they do with that. I know that as physicians transition some of their practice over to emails and virtual meetings, they manage to maintain some compensation for their time. We'll have to see. I don't know. I don't know. Well, time will tell.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of your insights and discussion, the wonderful panel that we had here today. I think we can all agree that AI is constantly evolving, constantly changing, and we as industries and people working within these industries need to grow and learn with it. And I like what Trey said earlier, with great power comes great responsibility. So we appreciate everyone's insights and discussions. We learned a lot here today, and I'm sure we could talk about this for many hours. Unfortunately, we have to close out today, but we appreciate our wonderful panelists and our moderator, Antoine, for being here. So a couple of other areas that we wanted to just quickly observe. A reminder, if you would like some one-on-one help with resume writing, interview tips, LinkedIn job search strategies, there's opportunities for you to get some one-on-one coaching services. And you can find more about that at ukalumni.net/career. We also have Job Club the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. And there's a link in your chat box about that, as well as other career and professional development events that we have going on. Now, again, thank you so much for kicking us off, joining Leadership Week today. And we appreciate you being here in partnership with the UK's Alumni Association and UK Healthcare Enterprise and Learning. Tomorrow we have another wonderful talk about appreciation in the workplace, and that will be presented by Chasen Chadwell, who's the Senior Organizational Development Specialist at UK Healthcare Enterprise Learning. We have many wonderful events continuing on throughout the week, so we hope you can join us, and we appreciate everyone being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah, Trey, Daniel. Thank you guys so much.